Hello, Malcolm Brady here. I'm from Dublin City University. I want to talk to you today about strategy implementation. This is the fourth phase or the fourth element of our PACE framework: purpose, analysis, choice, implementation, or execution. So this is a critical part. Two quotes that just set the scene here for us. One by Niccolo Machiavelli, 1532, and he warns us really that there is nothing more difficult to carry out, no more doubtful of success, no more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. For the reformer has enemies in all who profit by the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in all who would profit by the new order. So essentially, whenever you go to shift things, and strategy implementation is all about changing things, making, driving something new. There will be blockages along the way. People won't want it, or a number of people won't want it, and it's fairly clear what you don't want. The defenders are lukewarm because they're not really clear exactly what will happen or whether it'll really work out in the end. So they're behind it, but only so much behind it. Whereas the defenders know exactly what they're going to potentially lose and can be quite strong in their defense. So just to be aware of that. Nothing more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. However, if you don't initiate change, we have to remember Darwin's point, and that is that it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So change is part of life. Change is part of keeping going, keeping the species alive. So there's the two sides of change, and both of those are relevant to implementation. I'm now going to go through three frameworks for implementation that I think you'll find useful in terms of organizing how to initiate a new strategy or a new set of new projects that are implementing a new strategy. So this is the first one from Bourgeois and Brodwin, 1984, and this is from their Strategic Management Journal paper. So it's quite a complex paper, and I'm only going to summarize it very briefly here for you. But essentially, they point out 5 different approaches to major implementation of strategy or major change in an organization. And they start with the one on the left, top left there, commander. And this is really where the leader of the organization is the rational decision maker, decides what to do, and essentially organizes the carrying out of those orders. And things work in the light of the supreme commander, which obviously is okay when you have a fairly small organization, but as the organization gets larger, one person hits limits in terms of their abilities, their bounded rationalities, and so on. So you hit that one commander will hit limits in what they can do, and usually at some point they need to draw in further resources, and that leads us to the two on either side of the commander there. The collaborative one, which is where the commander really draws in a set of other leaders, management team, who together implement the strategy. So this obviously spreads the work around and increases the ability, the skill set. However, you can end up with internal politicking among that group as well. So you do have to be careful about that. And on the other hand, you have to be careful about all of the group think phenomenon, where that whole set of people think along the same lines, and therefore may have the potential to make a wrong decision and nobody recognize it or alert the team to it. So the notion of a collaborative approach to strategy implementation, which would be fairly common. I mean, many organizations are run by a top management team. The change approach is another alternative that's still under the top-down heading, and that's where the commander draws in the systems of the organization and uses those as levers to implement or to encourage change. So the commander may, set the parameters for the reward system, for the objectives of the organization, for guidelines in terms of policies and procedures for implementation, and so on. So they use all of those levers in order to initiate change. It tends to be an opportunistic type approach because you can only alter a lever when circumstances allow. And it can be problematic in that you can alter a lever and yet that doesn't really work in the way you want, but it can be very difficult to undo that lever to recover from that change. So it takes a deal of orchestration to get that right. But many of the change models we look at essentially take that approach where we look at structure, systems, and so on in order to initiate or change or implement strategy. The fourth one then, cultural, is again a participative model. And that's where instead of just getting a management team or a management group to implement the new strategy, you actually pass that work around to the entire organization where you possibly can. And a lot of the total quality, just-in-time, lean systems tend to operate in that fashion where you essentially get all of the workers to buy into a new, work philosophy, and that then allows delegation, allows decision making to be transmitted down the line, and control often is down the line as well, as in control is often through peer pressure or through clan type cultures in an organization. So again, that's a participative model to strategy implementation where it's distributed among the whole organization. And then the final one they label creative, which is from the Latin word for grow. And the idea here is that strategy grows from the bottom up. So the leader of the organization in this sense sets guidelines or broad policies, broad rules in terms of how the organization wants to go forward, and then allows ideas develop at the ground level and filter up from the bottom of the organization, and then the leader will have to form some sort of judgment on these initiatives and support some and possibly alter others or say no to some. Okay, so the leader plays a role here in terms of setting the guidelines initially and then judging the ideas that come up from the bottom. And obviously there's a great deal of delegation of responsibility for strategy implementation here, and that line managers have a major role in initiating ideas. So there are the 5 broad approaches that Bourgeois and Brodwin put forward. As I say, their paper in Strategic Management Journal goes into much more detail than I have gone into now, but certainly do go, if you wish to look at, read more about this, go to their paper. The second model then is Peters and Waterman, or Waterman, Peters and Phillips, as it says here. This is from these were McKinsey consultants, so it came from McKinsey's work, and it came also from, it was made popular in their book In Search of Excellence, which was a major seller in the 1980s, and they developed this 7S framework from that work in terms of how strategy was actually implemented. So you can see here they have 7 S's, so they've chosen S to make it easy to remember, and it actually works. I think I can often remember these 7 from the top of my head, whereas other rubrics I struggle with. So the 7S does tend to work in that respect, but it does mean that some of the S's may not be as clear as you might prefer. Okay, but anyway, they start with strategy, and we've been looking at that so far, so we have a great deal of knowledge of strategy already. But they're saying essentially that you need to do much more than just simply look at your strategy in order to get it implemented. You need to look at all the other elements of the organization. You must look at structure, and the structure must support the strategy. It must be appropriate to the strategy, or if it's not, you may need to look at altering structure in order to support the new direction you want to go. Similarly, the systems of the organization, IT systems, work allocation systems, reward systems, all of these systems must support the strategy. If they don't, it tends to inhibit the strategy from working well. Strategy, structure, and systems are sometimes known as the harder end of the 7S framework, and the bottom 4 are sometimes seen as the softer element of the softer elements of the 7S framework. Superordinate goals is essentially the overall purpose of the organization. It must know where it's going. We've talked about this quite a lot, and purpose is one of the major elements of our PACE framework. The other 3 then are staff and skills, which are to do with the human resources, the people that will carry it out, and the competencies of the people in order to carry out your strategy. And style represents, in a sense, a mixture of management style and organizational culture, but it's the way the organization works, the kind of hidden side of the organization. We tend to term it culture now. And essentially, all of those elements must work together. They must fit. There must be a good fit between these elements. If the systems are, if the organization wants to, move to a low cost approach, well, the systems have to be able to provide information and data on costs incurred by the organizations, so that the organization can know if it's really adopting a low cost approach. So there has to be that kind of fit between different things. So that's really their framework. They're just identifying those 7 elements, that the 7 elements interlink, and there must be a good fit between them. So they're the key messages really from the 7S framework. In terms of your own organization, if you're looking to implement strategy, it's a good checklist as well to consider, go down through the 7S's and make sure that you've considered the implications of the new strategy for each of those headings. The textbook, Thompson and Strickland's textbook, provides a similar rubric, really, and you'll see there's a lot of overlap between this here and the 7S framework. So I won't over-elaborate it, but it's useful to go down through it. They give 8 different headings, and some of the texts, some of the versions of the text give 9 or 10 headings. I'm using these 8 here. As a good checklist. So again, the organization, the structure, they're really talking about the organizational structure here, that it must be capable of supporting the strategy. The resources must be allocated. So you must have enough resources. We talked about decision making. If you don't allocate the resources to the decision, it's unlikely to happen, or if the resources aren't sufficient, it's unlikely to happen well. So there must be a fair and appropriate allocation of resources to the activities that are part of the strategy. Policies should be clear, and they must be laid out and clear, and procedures, policies and procedures go hand in hand. Procedures are a detailing really of the policies. They recommend best practice, which goes without saying, and that's very much in line with all of the quality, lean, just-in-time movements as well, which talk about best practice procedures. Systems should be efficient. We've spoken about those already, and the rewards should be appropriate. The reward system is one of the big levers of strategy implementation. People respond to rewards. So if you want to reward, say, growth, if you have a strategy of growing, well, you can reward growth. If you have a strategy of, if part of your strategy is to encourage greater cooperation and innovation in the organization, you need to find ways of encouraging or rewarding cooperation and innovation, which is not so easy. Okay. Culture should be supportive of the strategy. We talked already in the previous slide about a cultural approach to strategy implementation, where you actually use the culture as the main mechanism. Culture is a two-edged sword. If it's supportive of the strategy, it can be really hugely helpful in implementing the strategy. If, on the other hand, it's not supportive, if it's a culture that's in antithesis in some way or other to your new strategic direction, it can really hold back the strategy. And cultural change, you may need to look at altering your culture, and that's a very significant job, long-term job to change a culture of a large organization. And obviously leadership should be effective, should be clear, leaders should be able to explain the strategy and encourage and motivate people to get along with it. So there are the 3 models of strategy implementation. So I'm going to finish there now, and in the next session I'll look at some detail particularly on the systems. So we'll pause now. Thank you.